Alright, so in the Fibonacci sequence, you can keep going. I'm just gonna, because I would be interested. I will interject every so often. So the Fibonacci sequence originally was a solution to a problem that was dealing with the mating habits of rabbits. Terrible rabbit. Anyway. So the idea started at if, you know, Fibonacci is actually Leonardo di Pisa, Leonardo di Pisan, or Leonardo Pisan, or I can't remember. There was another like last name that he had, but it wasn't that. Anyway, it's buried somewhere in here. So Leonardo basically came up with this whole sequence as a puzzle solution to the mating habits of rabbits, wherein he said if you started out with one pair of mating rabbits, then after 1 month, and it was arbitrarily set for 1 month that this pair would grow into an adult pair. Then you would have an adult pair of mating rabbits, which mate at the end of that second month. So here we've got 1 for the baby pair of rabbits you get, 1 for the adult pair of rabbits you get, and then after 1 month further, you end up with the adult pair that you already had, plus 1 baby pair. After 1 more month, you would have this baby pair grows up into an adult pair. Yeah. And then the adult pair that we had last time mates again and has 1 more baby pair. After another month, the 2 adult pairs have baby pairs. And the baby pair grows up into an adult pair, making it 3 adult pairs now. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the history behind it. The sequence itself isn't really, like, hard. Right? The sequence itself is not something that, like, evaded mathematicians forever. It was just that it didn't really have a meaning, or nobody really thought of it like this. Like, you could take any 2 numbers and start adding them up and then adding more in the sequence. But eventually, Leonardo came up with this particular set to answer a particular riddle, which then people found meaning in this particular setup, in this particular sequence, for a long time after that. So this continues as far as we want to go, and after 12 months you would end up having 144 pairs of adult rabbits and 89 pairs of baby rabbits. At least I think that's how it is in the formalization that we have here. Okay. So interesting things with the Fibonacci sequence are that when you start looking at successive values, like clearly you're just adding the two numbers previous to it to get the next one. But the interesting thing is that when you look at the ratios between them, so, and then create your own sequence based on this. So 2 to 1, 3 to 2, 5 to 3, 8 to 5, 13 to 8, 21 to 13, 34 to 21, 55 to 34. Obviously, this just keeps going on forever, but I want to get at least these in. Because it's not going to take a huge amount of time. I got time. Alright, and then this continues on forever. If we were to look at the successive values of these things, we end up getting, 1 over 1 is 1, clearly. 2 over 1 is 2. 3 over 2 is 1.5. 5/3 is 1.6 repeated. 8/5 is 1.6 exactly. 13/8 is 1.625. 21/13, I'm going to actually need this one, is 1.6153846, and actually that's repeated. So 615384 is repeated. Well, we don't need the ellipsis if it literally is repeated. Okay, 55 over 34, I think. No, 34 over 21 is 1.619047. Yeah, and it's that. 55 over 34, I think I'm going to probably stop there. 1.61764705888, and then it just keeps going from there. And we'll do 144 over 89, which, again, this one here, 1.61797752809. Right, so the successive ratios converge to a specific value. Yep. And so the interesting thing about this is it's actually not unique to this. It actually comes out to be a standard practice. If you just take like any two numbers and follow the same pattern as the Fibonacci numbers. So like if we arbitrarily pick like 8 and 1 as our first two, this, when we add these two up, it's going to get 9. When we add these two up, it's going to get 10. When we add these two up, it's going to get, oops, these two, it's going to be 19, 29, 30, 48, 60, 70, 7, 110, and 15 is 125. Alright, if we take successive ratios of these values, obviously the first few are just going to be crazy, so we'll skip that. But 77 over 48, 77 over 48 is 1.60416 repeated, and 125 over 77 is 1.62337663. And it keeps going on like that. So the difference is approaching, or no, sorry, the difference is accelerating, because as we go further and further out, you get larger and larger values. But at the same time, the previous value, right, the one previous value and the next term after are staying right about the same ratio to each other, give or take, right? So up here, when we started, like I said, I just picked 8 and 1 kind of at random. I wanted it intentionally to go down first and then start climbing back up. This actually throws it off just a little bit because I picked bigger numbers, so it's going to converge a lot more slowly than the Fibonacci sequence. But like picking any random numbers and then doing the Fibonacci thing, where you're adding the previous two numbers, is always going to end up getting you a ratio of about 1.6. Yes, it will always converge to the same number. Reason being, there is a mathematical ideal that's hidden in there. So the mathematical ideal that's hidden in this particular sequence, in the Fibonacci sequence, as well as add the previous two numbers to get the next one of any numbers. Again, the other ones will converge more slowly. What you're doing is saying that there is a ratio between successive values which are going to be the same. Let me see if I do this right, because I definitely don't want to screw this up too bad. Let's see. The ratio between x and 1 is going to be the same as the ratio between x plus 1 and x. I think that's right. Yeah, that should be right. So, geometrically speaking, what this is it's taking a line and it's splitting it up in such a way that the first length here is 1, the second length here is going to be x. Like whatever unit it is. It doesn't really much matter. But the point is that that location is going to have the same ratio between x and 1 that the whole thing, x plus 1, has to just x. Now if we take this equation and we say, well, what is this if we try to solve it? Multiply both sides by x, like cross multiplication. It doesn't really matter in this case because that's a 1. But if you multiply your x's across, this is going to be x squared equals x plus 1. Move this stuff over and solve the quadratic. X squared minus x minus 1 equals 0. So what do we do with that? Well, you got to plug it into the quadratic formula. That one's not going to factor nice. Sorry. So x is equal to, this is a negative b, which is negative 1, plus or minus square root negative 1 squared minus 4 times a is 1 times c is negative 1, all over 2 times a is 1. All right, x equals, this is going to be 1 plus or minus square root. This is going to be 1 plus 4, all divided by 2. So x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 5 divided by 2, which are, well, approximately equal to. The negative version is negative 0.618. That's all right. 0.61803398875, and the positive version is 1.61803398875. And again, these are approximations to 10, 11 decimal places. Now, I will say that I didn't do a great job of like talking about where this polynomial comes from based on the Fibonacci sequence or what have you. That's okay. But this is the value. So it's labeled phi, and it is 1 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2, which is approximately 1.61803398875. Yep. It's been known since antiquity. So the Greeks figured it out, not with algebra, because algebra didn't exist back then, hence the name al-jabr, right? Not being a Greek name, coming from Arabic or Persian, I guess. So this value has been used since antiquity, and Pythagoras was one person who came up with instances of how this thing was being used all the time, and ish. Boo. Alright, whatever. I'll get it right one of these days. Anyway, close enough. So Pythagoras was really interested in looking at the geometry of this particular number, and he was able to find through either him or his students were able to find that if you drew a pentagram like this, then connected the corners of the pentagon that has been created, drawing out each of the possible connections, then you form another pentagram inside the first one. And then you can also form another one here inside that one. And then that forms another pentagram inside that one. And you can keep doing this forever. Right? Turtles all the way down. That's as far as I can go. And if it's drawn correctly, unlike this, then you end up finding out that each of these pentagrams are exactly the ratio of 1.618, 03398, etc., apart from each other. So all of their successive measurements are in this golden ratio. This also means that they could make a bigger one by connecting the 5 corners. Oops. And then continuing these out. This one's awful. Whoa. You make a pentagram, and again, you can continue this on forever, so outward. And again, the ratio of successive lengths should be equal to 1.618. This is probably not very good, but so if you measured, you know, this length here, as it exists on every single pentagram, up and down, you should get that exact ratio. So 1.618. And again, if you actually drew it, like, nicely. All you need to do is draw a regular pentagon, and then again, connect all the sides inside, and then connect all the sides outside, extend the sides outside, and then you get this pentagram symbol. And then you can nest them, again, all the way in and all the way out as far as you want to go. Back in those days, this was right around Asia Minor, which is now called Turkey. The Pythagorean Society existed. They were a cult that decided to basically, like, you know, sort of worship mathematics. It wasn't exactly worship, but it was pretty close. And decided that Pythagoras decided that all was number. Everything was going to be based on numbers, and everything was in harmonious like this, harmonious ratio with one another. He created an entire treatise on music in order to show that, you know, the nice sounding notes that play with each other are always in whole number ratios to one another. So if you pluck a string and then you, like, have the length and pluck it again, that's an octave. And if you do different values, the perfect fifths, the perfect thirds, all that stuff, all of those are in perfect ratios. And if you take a random place on the string and pluck it, it does not sound nice with the other sound. So it is dissonant. And those, well, it turns out they're irrational ratios. So if we end up having, like, something that is actually the golden ratio, it ends up not sounding great because it's not a rational number. It also ends up making beats in the music. So if you have ever, one thing that I did when I was a kid was I was tasked with vacuuming in my house, and I kind of I was humming something, and the vacuum was, you know, doing its noise at whatever frequency that was. And I know, right? Well, the thing is that it can be approximated by the rational fractions that we have back here. So if you're like 5 to 8, 5 to 3, or sorry, 8 to 5, 5 to 3, 3 to 2, you start getting these values, 13 to 8, I guess. You start getting these values which approximate this thing, and it's, you know, close enough to 1.6, 1.66 that they're like, ah, it's wonderful. Even though, did not mean to do that. Well, back in the old days, it was called natural philosophy. So you just basically study applied math, really. Was, you know, natural philosophy was studying everything. So biology, physics, chemistry, like, all of it together. We had to split it up because it was getting too much. You couldn't be a natural philosopher anymore. There was too much stuff. You could be natural philosophers at the opposite end of the spectrum and not even study the same stuff. Of course, nowadays we can also be mathematicians and study stuff at the opposite ends of the spectrum and not have any clue what the other person is doing. This is why usually we call, you know, people who study algebra, algebraists, and then you've got, like, geometers, and so there's all sorts of different fields now. Number theorists. Oh, brave man. Calc 2. Oh. It was fun, I will admit. And teaching Taylor series and watching their heads explode, that was fascinating. I loved that moment. Just like, wait, what? You can do what? Yeah, good times. So, yeah, Pythagoras. Pythagoras, like, had this whole treatise going on about how everything was number and everything was in ratio and perfect harmony and all that. And this was one of the problems with the actual value for the golden ratio, and also for the value of the diagonal of the square whose side lengths are 1. Right? Use the Pythagorean theorem, what do you get? Oh, look at that, it's root 2. And they were not able to figure out why this was not coming out to be a rational number. There were a few mathematicians within the Pythagorean Society who figured it out, that that's not a rational number. We can't come out with nice fractions for it. Nowadays, we can actually prove that if you have, a over b is in simplified form, and square root of 2 is that rational number, then what you can do is say, okay, this is going to be b times the square root of 2 is equal to a, and if we square both sides, then this is going to get b squared times 2 is a squared. This says that a squared, since b is an integer, then b squared is also an integer, and therefore, how much room do I? Okay. And therefore 2b squared is even. We just talked about that. And then also, oh, right. So if 2b squared is even, then this means that, oh, I'm sorry. Hang on. Yeah. So therefore, sorry. Wow. A squared is even. And since a squared is even, a is even. Now there are some sub-proofs that you have to do in order to show that this is true. But it's not terribly difficult. You'd probably understand it pretty well. If a squared is even, then a must be even. Okay, then we say, well, if a is even, then a could be written as 2k, where k is an integer. Okay, so then that means that 2b squared is equal to parentheses 2k parentheses squared. Jeez, I got like a dead spot in my tablet here where it keeps making, like I pick up my pen but it still traces. It's a little weird. Anyway, 2k parentheses squared is 4k squared. It's 2b squared is equal to 4k squared. This says that now we can divide by 2, both cases. B squared is equal to 2k squared. So therefore 2k squared is even, and so b squared is even, and so b is even. A over b is an even number divided by an even number, but we said a over b was simplified. So if we've got both of those conditions, where A is even, but also B is even, but it was supposed to be a simplified form, then all this breaks. So the initial idea that, the initial idea that root 2 could be expressed as a fraction of integers a over b, a rational number, is false. So square root of 2 cannot be rational. So the Greeks didn't have, the Greeks didn't have the language to do this, because again, you need algebra to really kick forward math proof so much, at least for this particular kind of thing. They could have done it with their geometric stuff, and in fact they did end up with some sort of proof that this wasn't working for them. But you know, I like algebra much better in this particular case, because you can replace one number with something else that looks just like it. And it really condenses this proof too. A few people had figured this out in the Pythagorean Society, and they were sworn to strict secrecy. They were not allowed to talk about it. They were not allowed to share that information with anybody. That was very privileged information. It was classified, essentially. And at some point, somebody decided to blab and ended up incurring the wrath of the Pythagoreans. They took him out on a boat in the middle of the Mediterranean and booted him off. And, you know, you can't swim that far. Yeah, you can't hide the truth forever, absolutely. But also that guy couldn't swim very far. So they were out, I mean, they were out in very far away from land. So unfortunately, he drowned, and the Pythagoreans lived on for another few years at least, until, as the story goes, Pythagoras or somebody pissed off somebody in the local town. The local townspeople grabbed their pitchforks and torches and decided to murder all of the Pythagoreans. Their entire society ended up, secret society, ended up dying on pretty much one night right there. Pythagoras allegedly started running for his ship, and one of the tenets of their faith, I guess, if you want to call it that, is that you had to be a vegetarian because they believed in reincarnation, so their friends would come back as animals. Why would you want to murder them? So you have to be vegetarian. But also, you can't eat beans because they're of a lewd shape. So he came across, allegedly again, he came across a bean field and was like, no, I can't cross that. And he essentially, the story goes, he turned to the crowd and said, I would rather die than run through a bean field, at which point they were more than happy to oblige. Set mathematics back for a little bit, but at the same time, they weren't the only school in Greece, or in the Greek Empire at the moment. Again, this is in essentially what is Turkey, coming around the side of the Mediterranean. So the Greek Empire at that point extended around the Mediterranean into Egypt, some of northern Africa, and they held a lot of land at the time. But as most empires go, when you have problems shipping stuff from one end of the empire to the other very quickly, you got some problems. If you're not listening to people out on the edges, they're also going to start some sort of rebellion, or there's going to be problems without that are going to start coming in. And so the Greek Empire fell a bit, much like the Roman Empire eventually, in that there were assaults on the empire from without, and having some issues there. Yeah, they ended up falling as well. Unfortunately, that was the end of Greece and the end of intellectualism for a while in Europe, due to the fact that the Romans were much more interested in the engineering marvels that one Archimedes, for example, had. He was a bit later, but and they were much more interested in counting troops and having siege weaponry than they were in just thinking about things for fun. Yeah, there's a good book about this one here. Um, favorite mathematician. I have a few. So, and for different reasons. Um, there is a good book called Phi, or The Golden Ratio, and thank you, sir. So there is a good book for The Golden Ratio by Mario Livio, and he's on Twitter and also on Facebook if you are and want to contact him. Just, I'd suggest reading a book or two first. Probably available in your local library or on loan, what have you. I think he does a great job with trying to explain like the history behind things. I was always somebody who really hated history in high school, and going back to do we just drop some frames? Nope. Okay. Yeah, and if you come up with any like formalizations of anything in particular, or questions or stuff like that. So if you want to know why something is the way it is, or if like somebody does something and you're like, I don't see where they're going with this, feel free to drop me a note. So nsimplexpachinko@gmail.com, and I will eventually get to it on a stream. I don't have really anybody like emailing me on the regular basis, so I've got a couple of people who, drop in questions every so often. So I was somebody who hated history in high school because it was all memorization and facts and all that stuff. And then like in college, I took the math history class, and my girlfriend at the time gave me a book. This was actually a few years before that. Gave me a book called Zero, the Biography of a Dangerous Number. Number? Idea. I don't remember. Either way. One or the other. Dangerous. This one is Michel Safe. At least I think so. I know it's right. I'm kind of arguing about the spelling. I think it's right. 10-second Google search. All right. So my girlfriend at the time gave me this book, and I read through it as a student of calculus, 12th grade, and I was just enthralled by all of it. Every single piece of information that was in it was just fascinating. And I read through this. I read through Alex's Adventures. In Numberland. This is, oops, Alex Bellos. This is also called, here's looking at Euclid. Depending on which version you get. The US edition is Here's Looking at Euclid, and the UK edition is Alex's Adventures in Numberland. It's playing on Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and Here's Looking at You Kid from Casablanca. So the point behind a lot of this stuff is just like looking at the history of mathematics and a lot of the implications that have been done since. Alex's Adventures in Numberland, or Here's Looking at Euclid, has a lot more of like contemporary stuff as well. So I was rather interested to read about the Vedic math, which was the process by which the Hindu Vedas had encoded in them the way to add, subtract, multiply, and divide numbers. There might be more, but those were the ones that I looked at. Adding, I really looked at multiplication, or he did too, but multiplication was the one that I looked at that and I was like, that is brilliant. I'm taking that. And I've been teaching it to my students ever since. So I've probably done this on stream many times, but something like 345 times 167. We don't have to go in order. 617, sure. The way that they did this was they said, okay, how do you get ones? So the ones place is going to be multiplying your ones by your ones. So 5 times 7 gets you 35. And then put the amount you're bringing up down here. To get the tens place, you're going to multiply tens by ones and tens by ones this way. So you're essentially doing this cross multiplication thing. I hate the term cross multiplication. Anyway, so you're going to multiply the 40 by the 7 and the 10 by the 5. So this is 28 plus 5 is going to be 33, plus 3 is going to be 36. So we can put this in here. How do we get hundreds? Well, hundreds are hundreds and ones, and tens by tens. So you're keeping a little bit of extra multiplication in your head, but this actually saves a lot of space. 3 times 7 is 21, plus 6 times 5 is 30, so that's 51, plus 4 times 1 is 4, so 55 plus 3 is 58. How do you get thousands? That's going to be hundreds by tens. So 24 plus 3 is 27, plus 5 is 32. How do you get 10,000s? 10,000s is getting hundreds by hundreds, which is 18, plus 3 is 21. So now the total for 345 times 617 is going to be 212,865. And the work is done in one line, if you can do it in your head. Or, alternatively, you can have an abacus off to the side and do the numbers on that one. Do your little multiplications. I did also start learning how to use an abacus. I have the Japanese version, which is called the soroban, which has four stones on the bottom and 1 stone on the top for your fives. So the 4 ones and 1 5. So it can only add up to 9, and then you have to manually configure like how to carry the tens. The European and Chinese and Middle Eastern probably abacus, proper abacus, has the 5 stones at the bottom and 2 stones at the top, which allow you to smoothly transition your carryover values. So I think they're slightly superior in that sense, but at the same time, the soroban is really wonderful piece of engineering, and it helps you understand, like, okay, I need to add 10 here, but I don't have a 10, or I need to add 5 here, but I don't have a 5 stone. So instead of adding 5, I can add 10, so put a 1 up in the next column beyond that, and subtract 5. So it allows you to do that trade-off kind of immediately. So instead of adding 5, you add 10 and then subtract 5. There's all sorts of cool stuff. All right. While I'm here, anybody have any questions? Oh, right. Favorite mathematician. I should probably read that more carefully. Yeah. So I have a few, and like I said, for different reasons, for different personalities, I kind of tend to gravitate toward either people who are like have a personality that I gravitate toward, or a particular thing that they invented that I was just like, that's really cool. In terms of story, I mean, who can beat that one? Srinivasa Ramanujan was a mathematician at the turn of the 20th century, so he was alive, early 1900s, just before World War One. Oh dear. That's awesome. Yeah, so mathematicians, or, well, the academics at Cambridge College were kind of arguing about whether or not England should join in the war. I believe that this was the Great War that they were talking about, i.e. World War One. And around the same time, Ramanujan had ended up sending letters out to Cambridge professors to say, like, hey, I just figured out a whole bunch of really cool stuff in math, and like this is the book I'm working off of, and I really would appreciate if you all would take a look at this, and like, is there anything anything I can do, somewhere I can go with this? And most of the professors were very unkind about it, saying like, oh well, he's from India, so doesn't really, there's not anything we're gonna get out of this that's new. And one particular mathematician said, there is some new stuff here. Like, this is really fascinating that he says he's kind of self-taught. Basically, he had some formal training, but it wasn't a huge amount. And then he started working out of a mathematical book, and he was also a motorcycle repairman, and started, trying to work out new types of math. And he did some research into things, and the mathematician in particular who took an interest was G.H. Hardy. Yeah, he was born in 1887, and went to Trinity College in Cambridge. There we go. My internet apparently is going slowly. So G.H. Hardy took an interest in him. He took him under his wing and said, like, this is really interesting. You have a lot of gaps in your like formal logic and stuff like that, but the ideas that you're coming up with are fascinating. He had brand new interpretations of some old things that were found and thought to be 100% like already figured out, already done. And some of which included using infinite series to describe some results in mathematics. I don't have any offhand here, but he came up with a value for pi that involved an infinite series. He ended up with infinite series that involved, oh man, that's a lot of stuff. Hyperbolic cosines and the gamma function. And there's a lot of other stuff that I'm not even going to be able to get into really here. But at any rate, yeah, Ramanujan was brilliant, and we unfortunately, humanity lost him at an early age. He was only, let's see, that's 37 when he died. So a combination of stress, malnutrition, all sorts of bad stuff ended up plaguing him, and he had horrible reaction to it. Ended up going back home to India and died there. But yeah, G.H. Hardy was an interesting character. His story is much more interesting than his accomplishments, most people think. So a lot of times he declared himself at one point the enemy of God. You heard that right. And since he declared that God was his enemy, he carried an umbrella everywhere because he was determined, God would be determined to ruin his day. So before he went out to cricket, even though it was sunny out, he would bring an umbrella with him and do his papers with his umbrella. Not literally, just bringing his umbrella, he would do papers on the cricket field. While watching the matches. And there were some other weird things. Nash and Turing are very interesting. Again, both for accomplishments and for their stories. Both tragic figures. Nash plagued by mental illness, and Turing plagued by a society which did not accept him. So at the time, he had had a relationship with a young man, and the police arrested him for indecency, public indecency, just for being gay. And then he was told by the judge, either you're going to go to jail or you have to submit to hormone treatments. He submitted to the hormone treatments, and unfortunately he ended up succumbing to depression and many other things, and ended up killing himself. Oh, he was just recently, he received an apology, formal apology from the British government. Forgot about that. Oh, I also met Ken Appel, who did a guest lecture in our History of Math class. Ken Appel is best known for the four-color theorem. And he was a professor at the University of New Hampshire while I was there. So a lot of he received a lot of scrutiny due to the fact that the four-color theorem was proven by him using exhaustion by computer. So he used a computer to prove that there were no possible other arrangements, that all of the arrangements had to have been covered by four-color theorem. And yeah, he received a lot of flack because that wasn't real math. That was using a computer. Yeah. Which most of my professors were like, seriously, if it works, it works. Just if you can find an ingenious way to do it, great. But other than that, let's just get a result and then worry about making it pretty later. Yeah, there's all sorts of proof by technology we used in the last, 50 years or whatever. But he was a really good lecturer. I liked him, although I will say we only had him for one day, so I can't necessarily say that was, maybe that was his best. There's a lot of up-and-coming people in math too, and I don't necessarily know them terribly well, but like looking at lecture series, TED Talks, and like who's won the Fields Medal or other minor prizes lately are really good, or winning, or not winning, but those who have taken the chair positions at various colleges around the world. So I've been trying to keep an eye on people, but there's only so many there's only so many people you can pay attention to. In terms of like math presenters these days, yeah, I mostly go for like the entire cast of Numberphile is wonderful. I really like their work.